Good evening. I would like for you to turn the pages of your Bible to the book of Ecclesiastes, the book we're going to be looking at throughout our lesson this evening. Ecclesiastes it's not an easy book to grasp and understand. And I'm not claiming to have grasped and understood everything in it. I still have some questions about various passages in the book. But I think I have finally, in the last, 2 or 3 years, kind of got a better grasp on it, at least than I did before, and seen a pattern within the text that I think helps us find our way through this book. I'm not going to comment at length on the authorship of the book of Ecclesiastes. It is at least written kind of in the person of Solomon. It may be someone else writing from what they view as Solomon's perspective. I think there are good arguments for that. Or it may have been written by Solomon himself. But I will simply refer to the author as we work through this text. I'm sure at some points I will accidentally say Solomon, but I'm not sure it was him, so I'll try to stick with the author of the book. As I think you probably are aware, in Ecclesiastes, the author is struggling with how to look at life under the sun. Under the sun. That means life here on earth, where we are under the sun. And in this book, he talks about a lot of difficult and frustrating things about life under the sun. And if you drove west at all on your way to services this evening, you saw some of that difficulty about life under the sun. I was having to hold my hand up part of the time. But yeah, there are difficult things about life under the sun, life here on earth, this physical existence. But what I think I've seen in the book of Ecclesiastes is he's talking about how we need to look at these things, or rather, in some respects, not to look at some things, at least not be obsessed with them and not stress about them. So he's talking about how to enjoy life under the sun, in spite of the fact that some things are not what they might seem or what we would like them to be. He talks about some vain and futile things that people pursue and that people worry over. He talks about obtaining things, possessions, gaining wealth, and making things, and that turns out to be vain. He talks about some of the frustrating things of life, that they're just going to be that way, and you might as well not stress over some of those things. Those are not the ways to contentment. Well, let's get into the book, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything's pointless. There's no point to anything. It's all vain and futile, he says. I think he's probably speaking to some degree in hyperbole. I don't know that he's saying every last thing is vain to do. I don't think that's what he means. But the way you have a bad day and you say, everything went wrong. Well, did really everything go wrong? But we say it that way, even if not every last thing went wrong. I think that's the kind of statement he says when he says, all is vanity. And then we get down to verse 14. He says, I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. He's a man who knows life. He has experienced life in its fullness. He's seen it all. He's seen all the stuff that we have concerns about. And he says there's no point to any of it. And yet, some of these very things that he's going to talk about in this book are things that most people worry about or try to achieve and stress over. And I think a lot of Christians have this similar problem of focusing on those things. One thing, we're gonna look at kind of 3 areas of things that people tend to focus on the author says it's pointless, it's vain, it's futile to worry about those things. The first one that some people focus on, that the author of Ecclesiastes talks about, is wealth. Gaining wealth. And not just cold hard cash, but all the things that go along with wealth. All the things that you can do, all the things that you can build, the wealth that you can accumulate for yourself, things for entertainment, for fun, the accomplishments that you can reach. So we're going to look here for the next couple of minutes at chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. Chapter 2, verse 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. That's what a lot of people think life is about, finding ways to enjoy yourself. The author of Ecclesiastes says, and behold, it too was futility. Well, maybe he just didn't get enough. Maybe if he'd gotten a little more than he got, he would have realized, yeah, that's the life. No. Chapter 2, verse 4. We're going to read several verses here and comment as we go through. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I've got one house. He built multiple houses for himself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. You might be picturing as we're reading this how that would have looked in Solomon's day. I want you to picture how it would look in our day, of somebody who's able to do these things. Someone who owns multiple houses. He's got a vineyard, he's got gardens and parks, and he's got, an orchard with all these fruit trees. Verse 6, I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Maybe we would convert that to domestic servants, I don't know. And I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. I don't know that we would think about accumulating singers to work for us, hiring the stars of Nashville or wherever. But that's a form of entertainment. And we sometimes spend a lot of money on our entertainment, on going places that entertain us, on software that entertains us, on programs that entertain us. He had all of this in the form of his age. Let's see, I've lost my place here. Verse 9. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. And all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Now, before we read the next verse, I want us to go to 1 Kings for just a moment and read just a little bit more about his wealth, the level of wealth that he had. 1 Kings chapter 10, we're going to read verses 21 and 22. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None was of silver. It was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon. For the king had at sea ships of Tarshish with the ships of Hiram. Once every 3 years the ships of Tarshish came, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. All of this wealth that he brought in made silver just kind of, a later verse here says that silver was kind of like stones in Jerusalem. Gold. Everything was gold. Solomon had the wealth. And he describes all of that for us there in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And then that next verse that we didn't quite get to, verse 11. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. It did not provide him contentment. All that wealth, all the ability to do, you've had dreams of I'd like to do this or make that or build this thing. All those dreams he could fulfill, and he did fulfill, and it was vanity. It was futile. It did not bring him contentment. It did not bring him happiness. And we know that from looking at, who in our society comes the closest to this level of wealth? Well, some of our celebrities have that level of wealth or come close to it. What do they also have? They have addictions and overdoses because they can't deal with the things that they need to deal with. They have family problems, messed up marriages and remarriages, psychological issues. Having it all doesn't lead to peace and contentment. So the author here says that it's like striving after the wind. I'm not sure exactly what to make out of that phrase, striving after wind, but I imagine it like this, that you're trying to catch some wind. And we had a windy day this past week, if I remember well, pretty windy day. I'm going to go catch some wind. So I go outside, I get my jar, I hold it up in the wind, put the cap on it, I caught some wind. You bring it inside, I don't have any wind. I don't know if that's the idea behind this phrase or not. But he's saying it doesn't work. It does not work. And so his conclusion about finding pleasure and contentment, at least for its own sake, through obtaining wealth and all the things that you can make for yourself, it fails as a way to contentment. Another focus that some people have, and that the author of Ecclesiastes writes about, is focusing on all the really frustrating things that happen around us, and sometimes to us, in life. The disappointing things of life. And we can look around our society or any society today and see a lot of very frustrating things, a lot of things that you look at and say, that's wrong. How could that happen? How could this person do that to this other person? The wrongs are abundant. Chapter 2, verse 18, verses 18 through 21. The author here says, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me." You build up all of this, you build up a business, you've got to leave it to somebody else. Verse 19, "And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he'll have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I labored by acting wisely under the sun." You start out small in your 20s or maybe your 30s, starting a business. And you work hard and you think through everything and you have a good plan and you build a business and it grows into a really good, big, solid business. And you leave it to your son and your son turns out to be a fool. And he destroys the business that you worked so hard to build up. "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he'll have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun." Or in chapter 3, verse 16. "Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness." You see that around you, don't you? Where you would expect somebody to act with justice, with concern, by doing the right thing by someone else, and they don't. They cheat somebody, they hurt somebody, they steal from somebody. In the place where there ought to be justice, even in the courts, the judge gets a bribe from somebody, or he's doing some political favors for somebody, and he realizes that this person has done this person wrong, but favor over here. And in the place of justice, we see wickedness. We see that all around us. We see hate instead of love. We see unfairness instead of love and concern. And the author of Ecclesiastes saw that as he writes in verse 16 of chapter 3. And then chapter 7 and verse 15, I've seen everything during my lifetime of futility. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. You've seen that. You've seen good people, their lives cut short. And you've seen wicked people that it would be better off for the world if they would just die, but they don't. They just keep living, doing their wicked things. The author of Ecclesiastes saw that same thing. He saw the frustration of that. Chapter 4, verse 1. Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun, and behold, I saw that the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, that they had no one to comfort them. There are people in terrible situations today. People who are oppressed. You can think of a nation being invaded by another nation, the terrible suffering that goes on. You can think of children being trafficked for sexual purposes. You can think of all kinds of ways that people are oppressed. And it happens. The author's response, verse 2, so I congratulated the dead who were already dead more than the living who are still living. And better off than both of them is the one who's never existed, who has never seen all the evil activity that is done under the sun. Oppression is all around us. And you can't solve it all. You can't solve it all. Solomon was king. And whether this is written by Solomon or someone writing in his place, it was obvious that even as king, an extremely wealthy and powerful king couldn't solve all of that. And that's just the way it is under the sun. You know, one case that I'll mention, because it's the kind of political hot button thing that gets our attention, and sometimes we stress about things like this because they get political. That baker out in Colorado a few years ago, he was a successful baker, had a bakery shop, made cakes and all kinds of pastries, I suppose. And a gay couple came in and asked him to make a wedding cake for them. And he said, I'm not going to make a cake that's obviously, you know, with two men on top. You know, I can't make that. And they took him to court. They targeted him because they wanted to. And they took him to court, and he won the first case. But then a couple of years after that, somebody else set him up in a way to try to sue him again, and did. And I don't remember if I've heard how that case turned out. I think he lost that case, just for trying to run a business and stand by his principles. The injustice that is all around us, and we see those things, and we're rightly offended by those things. We're rightly outraged by those things, and we say that's not right. But oppression is going to happen, and nothing's ever going to solve that. One response we can have to that is focus on that and just, devote our lives to solving all of these problems of oppression and becoming activists and not being satisfied until we're going to solve every last case. You know what? You'll never succeed. You're not going to find contentment that way. Because we live here under the sun, and those kind of things are always going to happen. The author's response to that is, it's better to already be dead. than still living in this world with all of this oppression and injustice. Wickedness where you ought to see justice. And then he says, better off than either already dead or still living is the one who's never had to exist, to come into this world and just constantly see these terrible things that happen. But we get obsessed with those things, and sometimes we talk about, especially when they become political hot-button issues, we talk about those things more than we talk about the Lord and faith and truth. Because we're so upset by these other things, we fail to remember what's our life really all about. Well, okay, we've talked about the futility of finding contentment by gaining wealth and all the material things of this world and pleasure and all of that. And we've talked about the futility of seeing all the oppression and trying to solve it all. There's a third focus that sometimes people get wrapped up in, and that's the fact of death. In chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, the author says, "For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other." I don't think he's saying that everything following the death is the same, although he does question kind of, do we really know? But I think primarily he's talking about just the fact that we die. An animal dies and we die. As one dies, so does the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there's no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place, the grave. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. There's something within us that rebels against the idea of death, and I think God put that there. That we find death this hugely negative thing that we want to avoid. We don't want death. We fight against death. We try to survive. And I think that's good. But the fact is, we're all going to die. And back to chapter 2, verses 12 through 16. "So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly, for what will the man do who will come after the king, except what has already been done? And I saw that the wisdom exceeds folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head." That seems like an odd idiom to us. But I think that just means, he can see. His eyes are where they ought to be. The wise man's eyes are in his head. But the fool walks in darkness. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been so extremely wise? So I said to myself, this too is vanity. Yeah, wisdom excels folly, just as light excels darkness. But you know what? No matter how wise you are, you're still going to die just like the fool dies. So what's the point? Back in chapter 9, again, the first 3 verses of that chapter. And we've actually already touched on this thought, but I want to include it here as well. Chapter 9, verse 1. "For I've taken all this to my heart, and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred." Or are you going to find love in life? Or are you going to find hatred in life? Anything awaits him. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good and for the clean and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice and the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. There is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. At the end of the verse, they go to the death. We all die, righteous or sinful, good terribly evil, we all die. We all die the same. Maybe you've had a loved one. Well, there's not much maybe to it. If you've lived a few decades, you've had a loved one die. And that can be hard, and it can be confusing. I'll tell you about my mother. She died almost 21 years ago. She was 65, and she was the picture of health until she was suddenly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And she fought it for a year and a half. And for a part of that time, it looked like things were getting better. And then suddenly realized, no, that they weren't. And she died. She was a very active woman in her faith. She had been able to influence a lot of people. There were women in other congregations several states away who would contact her and ask her to come teach a ladies' class for them for a week. She would do that. She was a good woman. And suddenly, at age 65, when she had been so perfectly healthy until then, she had stage 4 cancer and died. And you know, we prayed for her recovery. We prayed that she would live. But she didn't. And we can go through experiences like that, and sometimes we want to blame God, as if God doesn't know what he's doing, as if God made a mistake. My perspective, she shouldn't have died. Not yet, anyway. But in God's view, it was okay that she passes from this life. And it's not right for me to focus on this problem of death that, as the author says, that sometimes the righteous die and the unrighteous just seem like they live on and on and on and on. Because I can get angry about that, and I can blame God about that. And the author of Ecclesiastes says it's vanity to worry about that kind of situation. There's no profit in that situation. Okay, well, are you encouraged? There's a better message, though, in Ecclesiastes. So far, we've looked at these 3 areas that sometimes we tend to focus on that won't lead to contentment. Wealth, problem of injustice, and death. We can worry about those things, but it'll do us no good. Ecclesiastes is often painted as a very pessimistic book. And I don't think it is. It acknowledges a lot of the things that are negative and frustrating and difficult and hard. It acknowledges those things. But I don't think Ecclesiastes is a pessimistic book. Ecclesiastes is often viewed as presenting life that, you know, there's just so much wrong with it, but you just have to bare knuckle your way through and make it to the end, and then things will get better. My dad would talk about driving through Chicago. We lived, when I was a little kid, we lived just north of Chicago. So when we went to visit my grandparents in Michigan, we had to drive through Chicago to get there. When we traveled down south, we had to drive through Chicago to get there. Seems like everywhere we went, we had to drive through Chicago to get there. And invariably, it was, I mean, there's always traffic in Chicago, but invariably it was a time when there was a lot of traffic in Chicago. And my dad would talk about how his knuckles would just be white, gripping the steering wheel, getting through all of that traffic. And I think sometimes when we read Ecclesiastes and read all the negative things that are there, and you get to the end, and it's fear God and keep his commandments, and we think, well, the only solution is just fight your way through it. and get there, and there's nothing good in the meantime, but you'll get there, and if you fear God and you've kept His commandments, then you'll have your reward. Well, you're missing something if that's what you see in Ecclesiastes. It does acknowledge those negative things. It acknowledges that if you focus on wealth, that's not going to be a good life for you. It acknowledges that if you focus on all the wrongs and frustrating things of life and the problem of death, that you may become bitter and cynical and not a happy person. So don't focus on those things. Don't focus on those things. You can realize and accept that all those kind of things are the way they are. And you can decide not to chase wealth the way some people use a drug to try to escape the misery of their lives and find happiness. You can choose not to do those things and choose a different focus. Because interspersed throughout the book of Ecclesiastes is a series of short passages that talk about a better view of things than to focus on those three things. In the middle of all the frustrating, disappointing, unfulfilling things in life that we might be overwhelmed by or become obsessed with solving when there's no solution, we find this message of optimistically focusing on your labor and the simple blessings that God gives you. Your labor and the simple blessings God gives you. These are repeated over and over through Scripture, but here they are 5 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And this is the way. This is the good way. It is the best way. There's nothing better than this way. And we're going to quickly look at these 5 passages, short passages in Ecclesiastes. The first one is in chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. Each of these 5 passages you can find by noticing the eat and drink passages in Ecclesiastes. This is different, by the way, than the attitude of that rich man in Luke chapter 12 who had such good produce on his land, and he decided to just build bigger barns, and he said, eat, drink, and be merry. This is different than that. It's different than the people of Isaiah's day who said, let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. They weren't looking for any good thing to be appreciated from God. They were just, in the case of the people of Isaiah's day, we're all going to be dead. It's just a tragic thing. So enjoy what you can enjoy now. That sounds more like Solomon in chapter 2, just trying to enjoy everything. Or in the case of that rich man in Luke chapter 12, he wasn't concerned about doing good for anyone else or appreciating the value of good. He was just interested in preserving wealth for himself. Again, sounds like Solomon in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. But here in this first case, chapter 2, verse 24 and 25. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? That's the first of these 5 passages in Ecclesiastes. It begins, there's nothing better for a man than this. Which in my mind, in English, when I hear there's nothing better than something, I feel like it's kind of like it's 11 o'clock at night and you want to go out and get some food, and well, there's nothing better than Taco Bell at this hour of the night. It's not a compliment to Taco Bell. Sorry if Taco Bell is your favorite place. But I don't think that's the meaning here. I think he's really saying there isn't anything better than this. This is the best way. This is the best thing. He says it's from the hand of God. To eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. You work and you have some reward for that. Maybe there's some injustice. Maybe you ought to be getting paid more than you're being paid. But you get paid for that. And that's from the hand of God. Enjoy sitting down to eat and drink from the value of your labor. Enjoy sitting down with friends or family to eat and drink. Enjoy those simple blessings, that time together, the food that you have, the drink that you have. Enjoy that simple blessing. Now, that's the first of these cases in Ecclesiastes. These 5 times this kind of statement is made. With each of the next 4, he's going to add something to it. More than just eat and drink and enjoy that simple blessing. The second one is in chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. Are there these frustrating things that happen in life? Yes. You know what? Don't stress over that stuff. Eat and drink, seeing the good in your labor, which is a gift from God. And the line that comes just before that, there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. So enjoy these simple blessings that you have from God and use your opportunities that God gives you to do good. And rejoice in these simple blessings that you have, and rejoice in your opportunities to do good and to be a positive influence in this world where so much other stuff is frustrating. Do good. Rejoice in that. Eat and drink. Rejoice in that. It is the gift of God. The third of these passages, chapter 5, verse 18. Let's see, verses 18 and 19. Here is what I have seen to be good and fitting: to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in one's labor, in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, which God has given him. For this is his reward. For this is his reward is a phrase that was, in my mind, kind of like there's nothing better than. No, there's nothing better than this. And, well, you get some food to eat for supper. That's your reward. That is your reward. These simple blessings like food and drink, the opportunity to do good, to enjoy yourself in your labor, this is his reward. Verse 19. Furthermore, as every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. So that's not for everyone. The Ecclesiastes writer says, for the man to whom God has given riches and wealth. Some of us are given more than others. Some have more. Some have not as much, but they still have those simple blessings of God. And God gives as a gift to some greater wealth. And if God has given you greater wealth, don't feel guilty about that. Don't feel like, oh, I shouldn't have all of this. Enjoy those things. Now, there are a lot of other principles we could talk about. 1 Timothy chapter 6 instruct those who are rich in this present world to be generous and ready to share and things like that. But these are good things. This is the reward of God. God is the one who has been given riches and wealth. God has empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. So if you get extra, more than you really have to have, and most of us have more than we really have to have. If you have more than you have to have, rejoice in that. Find the joy in these simple blessings of God. And if they're a little bit more abundant, enjoy that as well. The fourth of these passages, chapter 8, verse 15. So I commended pleasure. Wait a minute. Back in chapter 2, wasn't he talking about I tried, finding fulfillment in life by having pleasure? Well, yeah, but that was kind of a godless kind of pleasure. This is a different focus. Chapter 8, verse 15. So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry, for this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. Again, we have this eat and drink statement And added to it is that this will stand by you in your toils. You know, you work through life, you work, you have this job. Sometimes the job is difficult, but you know what's going to stand by you? God gives you these simple blessings. So enjoy them and be happy, be merry throughout the days of your life. If you focus on that, that'll be good. The final one, chapter 9, verses 7 through 9. Go then, eat your bread in happiness, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. He's given you those simple blessings because he approved of your labor. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. I don't know if the author here is really saying wear white clothes all the time, or if he's saying live a clean life, so that it's like you're in robes of light. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the woman whom you have all the days of your fleeting life. If you have a wife, or a husband, I presume, then enjoy that person with whom you have all the days of your fleeting life, which is given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. So it's the simple blessings like food and drink, and being able to sit around a table with those you care about, friends or family, and enjoy those simple blessings. It's also, in this passage, the person you've married, the person you love. Enjoy that person all the days of your life, which he's given you under the sun, because this is your reward in life. The reward in life is not to have all the riches that you think you want. The reward in life is not that you're going to get to solve all the problems of oppression and injustice. The reward in life is not that your death is necessarily going to be better than the fool's death. The reward in life is to enjoy these simple blessings that God gives you and not worry beyond that. To see the things that God gives us, these gifts of God. Focus on those things. I'm not saying never notice the wrongs. When there are wrongs that happen close to me and it's something I think I can do about, then it's good to try to do something good about that and try to alleviate somebody's suffering if we can. But don't get caught up in how terrible is life because of all the injustice that goes on. Enjoy the blessings God gives you. Rather than being constantly agitated and upset by the problems we can't solve, and rather than trying to achieve all the wealth that we think we might be able to achieve that can never satisfy us, focus on what God has enabled you. Whether you have a lot or whether you have a lot, enjoy your labor. Enjoy the gifts God gives to you. Well, that's kind of the end of my lesson, but I kind of don't want to end a lesson on Ecclesiastes without noticing the end of the book. When we think about the end of the book, we generally go immediately to chapter 12, verse 1. Remember the Creator. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. And then these verses that follow that very poetically describe the discomfort of old age. But that phrase, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before those evil days come, really belongs with the end of chapter 11, rather than at the beginning of chapter 12. Look back to verse 9 of chapter 11, where he addresses the young man. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. And follow the impulses of your heart, and the desires of your eyes. There is something about youth, about young people, that is excited about life and sees this opportunity and that opportunity and this thing they could do. Pursue those things. I really believe that's what the author here is saying. Rejoice during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and desires of your eyes. Yet, keep in mind, know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So, following the impulses of your heart has to have some controls on it. Yes, follow your dreams. You see an opportunity, go and do it. The author is saying to young people, just keep in mind that you want to do what's good, not what's bad. You want to have a good focus, rather than the focus, I want to get rich. Because God is going to be your judge one day. He'll see if the impulses you followed were good or not. But on the whole, rejoice and follow the impulses of your heart. Verse 10, so remove vexation from your heart by remembering that you will be judged by these things one day. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Childhood and the prime of life are not what life is all about, being good. Enjoying the simple blessings of God. Doing good is what life is all about. So, he says, remember also your Creator. So, remember, follow the impulses of your heart, but remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. And then this change occurs to old age, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them. And these next few verses, as I mentioned, are this poetic description of the discomforts, very real discomforts of old age, at the time when the dust of our bodies will return to the earth. And he concludes in chapter 12, verse 13, the conclusion when all has been heard is, fear God and keep his commandments. That's something that's for each one of us. It's what will make us whole. And part of that is living with a view toward God and the gifts he gives us, and enjoying those simple blessings, finding happiness and contentment in those simple blessings, without getting caught up in focusing on getting rich, or focusing on the injustice of life, or focusing on the problem of death. Enjoy the things God has given you. We're going to stand and sing our song of invitation in just a moment. If there's some need you have to come before the group here, to ask for prayer, to be baptized into Christ, whatever your need may be, would you come as we stand and sing?
Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll sing. Someday